"I don't shake hands with interns," he said. A sharp silence filled the Sterling Dynamics boardroom, a stark white room overlooking the San Francisco Bay, where 5 male executives watched the scene with discreet smiles of approval. Eleanor remained motionless for a few seconds, her hand still outstretched, before calmly lowering it. At 42, this elegantly poised black woman had faced similar situations throughout her life, but something in her eyes revealed that this time would be different. "I understand perfectly," Eleanor replied with a disturbing serenity, discreetly adjusting the watch on her wrist, a gesture that no one in the room could interpret correctly. Elias, CEO and heir to the Sterling Dynamics empire, examined Eleanor from head to toe with barely concealed contempt. Her expensive suit and perfectly coiffed hair contrasted with the deliberate simplicity of the clothes Eleanor had chosen for this meeting, a strategic decision he had completely misread. "I assume you are the consultant sent by our investors," he said, emphasizing the word consultant as if it were an insult. "I hope you won't take up too much of our time. People like me have important schedules." 3 hours earlier, Eleanor had arrived at the lobby of Sterling Dynamics exactly as planned, dressed modestly and driving an ordinary car with no visible signs of her true identity. What Elias and his team didn't know was that Eleanor Carter controlled Carter Global Investments, a fund that managed over $60 billion, and was considering injecting $4 billion into Sterling Dynamics. The receptionist had instructed her to wait in the common area for 40 minutes, completely ignoring her polite attempts to confirm the appointment. 2 male security guards passed her 3 times, clearly instructed to observe her presence. Each slight was mentally catalogued by Eleanor, who understood perfectly the test she was applying to the company. "Our numbers speak for themselves," Elias continued, leafing through papers without looking directly at Eleanor. "I don't see the need to explain complex concepts to someone who probably wouldn't understand our strategic vision." Eleanor nodded silently, her hands folded in her lap as she watched every movement. Every word, every gesture of contempt being carefully filed away in her memory. The small recording device in her pocket captured every syllable of the most embarrassing presentation Elias would ever give in his life. "Any questions?" Elias asked at the end of a superficial and condescending presentation, glancing at his watch as if every second in Eleanor's presence was an unbearable waste. "Just one," Eleanor replied, her voice maintaining the same calm tone she had used from the beginning. "Do you really believe that this behavior represents the values that a partner company should demonstrate?" Elias laughed loudly, exchanging amused glances with the other executives. "Values, Miss Carter? Our only values are profit and results. I hope your superiors understand that when you report back." While Elias and his team reveled in what they interpreted as intellectual superiority, Eleanor allowed herself an almost imperceptible smile. There, in front of all the contemptuous stares, she stood firm, like someone guarding a secret too powerful to be revealed before the right time. If this story of prejudice and reversal touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to find out how 5 minutes of arrogance would turn into the most devastating fall the corporate world has ever witnessed. Elias Vance continued his presentation as if Eleanor were invisible, addressing only the other executives in the room. "As you can see, our numbers exceed all growth expectations," he said, pointing to charts on the wall with a gold laser pointer. "Excuse me," Eleanor said calmly, "but those revenue figures don't match the public reports from last quarter. There's a discrepancy of approximately $300 million. The silence that followed was awkward. Elias turned slowly, his face contorted into an expression of barely contained irritation. "Excuse me, but do you have experience in financial analysis of companies of our caliber?" "Some," Eleanor replied, maintaining the same calm tone that was clearly frustrating him. Elias laughed loudly, exchanging exasperated glances with Marcus Morrison, his vice president. "Marcus, can you believe this? She thinks she understands our numbers better than our own finance team." Morrison, a 50-year-old white man with an air of superiority, leaned forward. "Miss Carter, I imagine your superiors sent you here with some kind of checklist to fill out. How about we simplify this? Tell us exactly what you need to hear so we can end this meeting." Eleanor had faced this kind of behavior throughout her career. At 18, while still an intern at a small brokerage firm in Chicago, she watched as wealthy clients treated Black employees like inferior beings. At 25, when she tried to pitch her first independent investment proposal, she was kicked out of 3 consecutive offices before she even got a chance to speak. But every rejection, every look of contempt, every racist comment disguised as professional concern had forged in her an unshakable determination. While others gave up, Eleanor studied 18 hours a day, memorized financial reports like poems, and developed an intuition for markets that bordered on the supernatural. "Actually," Eleanor said, adjusting her watch again, a gesture she had already made 3 times, "I'm more interested in understanding the corporate culture of this company, its core values." Elias let out a genuinely amused laugh. "Values? Our only value is excellence, and we recognize excellence when we see it." He paused dramatically, examining Eleanor from head to toe. "Something that is clearly not present in this room." The comment elicited muffled laughter from the other executives. Eleanor remained impassive, but her phone vibrated discreetly in her pocket. A message from her assistant Liam, who was monitoring the situation at Carter Global's office. "Ready to execute Phase 2 when authorized." The message read. Elias, encouraged by his team's reaction, decided to intensify the humiliation. "You see, Miss Carter, companies like Sterling Dynamics operate at a level that requires a certain refinement, proper education, the right connections, experience in circles where real decisions are made." He walked over to the panoramic window overlooking the city's financial center. "I imagine it must be difficult for someone like you to comprehend the complexity of the operations we conduct here. It's not personal, you understand. It's simply reality." Eleanor nodded thoughtfully. "I understand your perspective perfectly, Mr. Vance. It's interesting how some people confuse inherited privilege with earned competence." The observation struck a raw nerve. Elias spun around, his face red with indignation. "How dare you! My family built this company from the ground up." "With an initial loan of $50 million from your grandfather's trust fund," Eleanor replied softly. "Public information, by the way." Marcus Morrison slammed his fist on the table. "This has gone too far. Who do you think you are to speak to Mr. Vance like that?" For a moment, Eleanor allowed her eyes to reveal a spark of the power she kept so carefully hidden. "Someone who knows the real value of things, Mr. Morrison." Elias took a deep breath, clearly struggling to regain his composure. "Very well. If you want to play auditor, let's give you something to audit." He pressed the intercom. "Julian, bring me the Meridian project reports, all of them." "The confidential ones too, sir?" asked the secretary's voice. "Especially the confidential ones. Our consultant here seems to have plenty of time for detailed analysis." What Elias didn't know was that Eleanor had already discreetly accessed the Meridian project reports through completely legal channels, information available to any serious investor. The project was 3 years behind schedule and $600 million over budget, with clear evidence of mismanagement and possible corruption. While waiting for the documents, Elias made a point of commenting loudly to Morrison. "It's amazing how some people don't recognize when they're clearly out of their league." Eleanor smiled discreetly, thinking of her office 6 blocks away, where a team of 15 elite financial analysts awaited her instructions. She also thought of the phone call she had received the previous morning from the CEO of Goldman Sachs, asking for advice on a $12 billion acquisition. Every word of contempt, every condescending glance was being carefully cataloged, not only in her memory, but on the high-quality recording device she carried. In a 40-minute meeting, Elias Vance and his team had provided enough evidence of discrimination to destroy his reputation forever. What those privileged people didn't know was that every act of contempt was writing their own sentence of defeat. Eleanor Carter wasn't just a patient woman. She was a strategist who understood that the best revenge is built brick by brick, word by word, until it forms an impregnable fortress of justice. As Elias Vance continued his performance of superiority, handing Eleanor a stack of documents as if it were a burden she deserved to carry, her phone vibrated discreetly on the table, It was a message from her CFO. Urgent meeting canceled. Lead investor has postponed decision on the $4 billion. No reason given. Elias's face twitched slightly, but he quickly masked his concern. Problems never come alone, he muttered, looking at Eleanor as if she were personally responsible for all the inconveniences of his morning. Any difficulties? Asked Eleanor, her voice maintaining that irritating serenity that made her increasingly frustrated. Nothing for someone like you to worry about, Elias replied, furiously typing a response. Complex international investment issues, concepts that require sophisticated experience. What Elias couldn't know was that 6 blocks away, Liam Thorne, Eleanor's right-hand man for 8 years, was executing the first phase of a meticulously planned operation. With a degree in finance from the University of Chicago and a specialization in risk analysis, Liam had learned from Eleanor that the best strategies are built on patience and precision. Phase 1 complete. Liam typed into his phone, watching the Sterling Dynamics building from his office window. Contacts at Goldman Sachs and J.P. Morgan alerted to ethical concerns at Sterling. $4 billion investment officially suspended pending investigation. The relationship between Eleanor and Liam had been born out of a situation similar to the one Eleanor now faced. 8 years ago, Liam was a brilliant young analyst at a Wall Street consulting firm, constantly passed over for promotions despite his exceptional results. Eleanor, already established as an independent investor, had witnessed Liam being publicly humiliated by a senior partner during a presentation to important clients. On that occasion, Eleanor had done something few would have expected. She waited until the end of the presentation, approached Liam discreetly, and offered him a position at her then small investment firm. I recognize talent when I see it, Eleanor had said, and I also recognize when someone is being deliberately underestimated. Liam never forgot that gesture. Together, they had built Carter Global Investments from the ground up, transforming it into the financial powerhouse it was today. More than business partners, they were soldiers in a silent war against the systemic discrimination they both knew intimately. Back in the Sterling Dynamics conference room, Elias handed Eleanor a folder filled with contracts and reports. Here are the Meridian Project documents you were so eager to review, he said with venomous sarcasm. I'm sure you'll find it challenging to follow our advanced methodology. Eleanor opened the folder calmly, her eyes scanning the documents with a speed that surprised even Marcus Morrison. Within 15 minutes, she had identified 3 serious accounting irregularities, 2 possible cases of overbilling, and a clear violation of federal environmental regulations. Interesting approach in item 7.3, Eleanor commented, pointing to a specific line. Reclassifying operating costs as research investments may work in the short term, but it will certainly catch the attention of federal auditors. The silence that followed was deafening. Morrison exchanged a nervous glance with Elias, who for the first time since the meeting began looked genuinely uncomfortable. How did you? Morrison began, but stopped, clearly disturbed by the accuracy of Eleanor's observation. Experience, Eleanor replied simply, continuing to flip through the documents. And I also noticed that the productivity figures reported here don't match the public energy consumption data for the Ohio plant, a discrepancy of about 22%. Elias felt a bead of sweat roll down his forehead. That was information that only someone with access to very specific data could know. Who exactly are you? He asked, his voice losing its tone of absolute superiority for the first time. Eleanor smiled discreetly, the same smile she had learned to use during years of being underestimated. Just someone who pays attention to details, Mr. Vance. At that moment, Elias's phone rang again. It was his corporate lawyer, Dr. Peterson, with unusual urgency in his voice. Elias, I need to talk to you immediately. We've received an informal notification from the SEC about a possible investigation into Sterling Dynamics, something related to irregular accounting practices. Elias paled visibly. That's impossible, he whispered. Our accounting is impeccable. Apparently, someone has provided very specific information about the Meridian project, Dr. Peterson continued. details that suggest an intimate knowledge of our internal operations. As Elias struggled to process this devastating information, Eleanor watched his growing anxiety with the same serenity she had maintained throughout the meeting. Every word of contempt, every gesture of superiority had been carefully cataloged, but more importantly, it had served as the time Liam needed to execute the first phase of his strategy. Eleanor Carter wasn't just a patient woman. She was a strategist who understood that the best revenge is not built on anger, but on the surgical precision of someone who knows exactly where to strike for maximum impact. For years, she had collected information on companies like Sterling Dynamics, not out of malice, but because she recognized the patterns of corruption and discrimination that always went hand in hand. Sterling Dynamics, with its facade of corporate excellence, was actually a house of cards built on shady practices and held up by the arrogance of those who believed themselves untouchable. And Eleanor, sitting patiently in that room while being humiliated, was about to knock down every card with the precision of someone who had spent decades studying exactly how these houses come tumbling down. "Everything okay over there?" Eleanor asked innocently, watching Elias hang up the phone with visibly trembling hands. Elias forced a smile, but his eyes revealed the growing panic that was beginning to take over his mind. "Just minor administrative issues," he lied, unaware that every second of contempt he had shown was irreversibly sealing his fate. What he couldn't imagine was that the woman sitting across from him wasn't just a victim of his prejudice. She was the architect of his ruin, and the construction had already begun. Elias's phone rang for the fourth time in 15 minutes. This time it was Julian, his secretary, his voice trembling with panic. "Mr. Vance, the financial press is calling non-stop. The Wall Street Journal wants a statement on the allegations of racial discrimination at the company." "Racial discrimination?" Elias repeated, his voice rising an octave. "What on earth are they talking about?" Eleanor watched Elias's growing agitation with the same serenity she had maintained throughout the meeting. Discreetly, she took out her phone and typed a single word: "Now." 6 blocks away, Liam received the message and smiled. "Phase 2 authorized," he said to his team of 5 male analysts waiting at their computers. "Release everything." Within seconds, a 43-minute audio file was simultaneously sent to 17 financial journalists, 12 civil rights activists, and 27 institutional investors in Sterling Dynamics. The file contained every contemptuous word, every racist comment, every moment of humiliation Elias had inflicted on Eleanor during the meeting. "I don't shake hands with interns." Elias's arrogant voice echoed through loudspeakers in newsrooms across the country. "People like me have important agendas. It's just reality. Someone like you." Elias was still trying to process the call about discrimination when Marcus Morrison burst into the room, his face red with panic. "Elias, we need to talk now. There are recordings of you circulating online. Extremely compromising comments." "Recordings?" Elias spun around to face Eleanor, his eyes finally showing a spark of real suspicion. You recorded our meeting?" Eleanor smiled calmly, pulling a small, professional recording device from her pocket. "I recorded every word, Mr. Vance. Every gesture of contempt, every prejudiced comment, every moment you chose to humiliate someone you believed to be inferior." "That's illegal!" Morrison shouted, lunging toward Eleanor. "Actually," Eleanor replied, her voice remaining annoyingly calm, "in California, only one party needs to consent to the recording of a conversation in which they are participating. I consented to my own recording." At that moment, Elias's desk phone exploded into a ringing frenzy. It was Julian Blackstone, chairman of the board of Sterling Dynamics, and his voice came through the speakerphone with controlled fury. "Elias, you have exactly 5 minutes to explain why our company is being associated with racist comments that are spreading like wildfire on the internet." Elias tried to respond, but Blackstone continued relentlessly. "Carter Global Investments' $4 billion investment was officially canceled an hour ago. They cited fundamental ethical concerns as the reason." "Carter Global?" Elias repeated, confused. "But our investor was May Financial." "There is no May Financial," Eleanor said softly. rising from her chair for the first time since the meeting began. "It's always been Carter Global Investments, my company." The silence that followed was deafening. Elias stared at Eleanor as if he were seeing her for the first time, his brain struggling to process the devastating information he had just received. You're Eleanor Carter?" he whispered, his voice a mere thread. "CEO and founder of Carter Global Investments," Eleanor confirmed, pulling a gold business card from her pocket and placing it gently on the table. $2 billion in assets under management, listed by Forbes as one of the 50 most influential investors in the world. Morrison grabbed the card with trembling hands, his eyes scanning the embossed credentials. Harvard Business School, former Goldman Sachs, member of the advisory board of the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco. "Over the past 6 months," Eleanor continued, "my team has thoroughly evaluated Sterling Dynamics as a candidate for our largest investment of the year. $4 billion that would make this company the absolute leader in its industry." Elias slumped in his chair, the weight of realization crushing his arrogance like a sledgehammer shattering glass. 6 months of evaluation. 6 months of observing how your company treats smaller suppliers, employees from different backgrounds, visitors who don't fit your aesthetic standard of success, Eleanor explained. "Today was my final test, an assessment of the ethical leadership of this organization." The phone rang again. This time it was Dr. Julia Vance, Director of Corporate Ethics for the National Association of Technology Companies. "Mr. Vance, our organization has just voted unanimously to suspend Sterling Dynamics' participation in our events until an independent investigation into discriminatory practices is completed." Elias hung up the phone, his hands shaking visibly. This will destroy our reputation." "Your reputation," Eleanor corrected gently, "has been destroyed by your own words and actions. I simply documented who you really are when you think no one important is watching." At that moment, Morrison's cell phone vibrated with an urgent notification. It was a Google alert about Sterling Dynamics. In less than 2 hours, Sterling racism had become a trending topic on Twitter with over 200,000 posts sharing excerpts from Elias's recording. "The company's stock has fallen 18% in the last 2 hours," Morrison read aloud, his voice breaking. "3 major investors have already announced their complete withdrawal." Eleanor watched Elias process the magnitude of his fall. In a matter of hours, he had lost the largest investment in his company's history, destroyed his personal reputation, and become the national symbol of corporate prejudice. "Why?" Elias finally asked, his voice small and defeated. "Why did you do this to us?" Eleanor walked to the window, looking out at the city stretching below. "Because companies like yours perpetuate a system where talent is judged by skin color, social background, or outward appearance. Because people like you use positions of power to humiliate those you consider inferior." She turned to face him directly. "But mostly because I believe the business world can be better. It must be better. And sometimes, for change to happen, examples need to be made." Elias tried one last desperate gambit. "We can work this out, make a deal, implement changes." "The changes your company needs," Eleanor replied, walking toward the door, "can't be bought or negotiated. They must come from a leadership that truly understands the value of every human being, regardless of their background." Before leaving, Eleanor stopped at the door and looked back one last time. "I recorded this meeting not to destroy you, but to force you to face who you really are. What you do with this revelation will determine whether your company has a future, or whether it will be just another example of how arrogance can destroy empires built on rotten foundations." As Eleanor left the Sterling Dynamics building, Elias remained seated in his office, surrounded by the wreckage of a reputation that had taken decades to build and only 2 hours to completely destroy. Outside, reporters were already beginning to gather at the entrance to the building. While on social media, the hashtag #JusticeForEleanor was gaining momentum, with thousands of people sharing their own experiences of corporate discrimination. Eleanor Carter's revenge had been executed with the surgical precision of a master strategist. But as Elias contemplated the ruins of his empire, one question remained. Was it possible that something better could emerge from this destruction? Or would Sterling Dynamics join the graveyard of companies that chose prejudice over progress? 6 months after the episode that destroyed Sterling Dynamics, Eleanor Carter looked out the window of her new office on the 52nd floor in Manhattan. The spectacular view of the city contrasted dramatically with the humble room where it had all begun years ago when she was still a young analyst struggling to be taken seriously. Carter Global Investments had grown exponentially since that fateful day. The video of her confrontation with Elias, which had racked up over 8 million views, had turned Eleanor into a national symbol of the fight against corporate discrimination. Invitations to speak at conferences arrived daily from universities, companies, and organizations around the world. Investment proposals have increased 40% since April, Liam reported, entering the office with a stack of documents. And we have 17 companies specifically requesting our ethical audit before closing major deals. Eleanor smiled, remembering the irony. Elias had tried to humiliate her by questioning her competence in evaluating companies, and now her firm was sought after globally for exactly that. Carter Global had created a new standard in the market, investments conditional on proven ethical practices. And Sterling Dynamics? Eleanor asked, even though she already knew the answer. Bankrupt last week, Liam replied. Elias lost everything. The mansion in the Hamptons, the yacht, even his apartment in San Francisco. He's living with his sister in Connecticut. Eleanor felt no satisfaction at Elias's complete ruin. Her revenge had never been about personal destruction, but about creating systemic change that would prevent future injustices. The fall of Sterling Dynamics would serve as a warning to the entire market. Companies that perpetuate discrimination will pay the highest possible price. The phone rang. It was Dr. Thorne, Dean of Columbia University. Eleanor, I would like to renew our invitation for you to give the inaugural lecture next semester. The topic would be business ethics and social responsibility. The students are extremely interested in hearing your perspective. After hanging up, Eleanor reflected on how her life had changed. 3 years ago, she had struggled to get meetings with small investors. Today, prestigious universities competed for her presence, and her ethical auditing methodology was being studied in business schools around the world. Liam approached the window. You know, he tried to get in touch several times, right? Elias. He left 17 messages asking to talk. Eleanor nodded. She had listened to the messages, desperate pleas from a man who had finally understood the magnitude of his actions. But some lessons can only be learned through irreversible consequences. I got an interesting call today, Liam continued. Johnson & Associates wants to implement our diversity protocol in all of its international branches. 43 countries, Eleanor, 43 countries adopting standards that were born out of that humiliating meeting at Sterling. The transformation had spread far beyond San Francisco. European, Asian, and South American companies began adopting the Carter protocols, strict guidelines that ensured equal opportunity regardless of race, gender, or social background. What had started as a strategy to expose a discriminatory company had become a global movement. Eleanor walked over to her desk, where a framed photo showed her team of 50 employees, a diverse group of brilliant analysts who represented exactly the talent that companies like Sterling Dynamics used to ignore. Each hire was a small victory against the system that had once tried to limit her. Remember that meeting? Liam asked, pointing to the wall where a discreet plaque displayed the date of the confrontation with Elias. When we left that building, I thought we had simply documented another case of corporate bias. And we did, Eleanor replied. But we also did something more important. We proved that the best response to discrimination isn't anger or resentment. It's excellence. It's building something bigger than those who tried to diminish us could ever imagine. The office door opened, and May, her new executive assistant, announced the arrival of her next appointment. It was a group of young Black and Latino entrepreneurs, participants in the mentoring program Eleanor had created with a portion of her firm's profits. As the young people entered, Eleanor remembered herself years ago, talented, determined, but facing invisible barriers that seemed insurmountable. Now she was the bridge that others crossed to achieve their own dreams. "Miss Carter," said Julian, a 24-year-old man who was developing an educational technology startup, "I wanted to thank you for the initial investment. Our company is already valued at $2 million. Eleanor smiled, remembering her initial meeting with Julian 6 months earlier. He had been rejected by 16 different investors, all citing lack of experience or inappropriate market, the same euphemism she knew so well. "Your success is proof that talent and determination always overcome prejudice," Eleanor replied. "You just needed someone to recognize your potential." At the end of the meeting, as the young entrepreneurs left the office carrying hope and resources to turn their visions into reality, Eleanor reflected on the true meaning of victory. Elias Vance had lost a company. She had gained the chance to change the world. Liam approached with one last update for the day. Forbes magazine wants to put you on the cover of their special issue on ethical leadership. The headline would be, "The Woman Who Turned Humiliation into Revolution." Eleanor declined politely. Her story had never been about personal recognition, but about creating opportunities for others. The true measure of her success was not in the billions she managed, but in the hundreds of careers she had helped launch and the thousands of minds she had inspired to never accept limitations imposed by prejudice. As the sun set over Manhattan, Eleanor looked out at the city that had once seemed too hostile for someone like her. Now, every light that came on represented a possibility. Every building, an opportunity to build something better. Elias Vance had tried to teach her about her place in the world. In response, Eleanor had completely redefined what that place could be, not just for herself, but for all those who would come after her. The best revenge, Eleanor had learned, was not to destroy those who had hurt her. It was to build something so extraordinary that their limitations became irrelevant, turning every no into fuel for an even bigger yes. If this story of transformation and perseverance touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories that prove that sometimes the greatest insults become the springboards for the greatest triumphs. Because in the end, true victory isn't about defeating your enemies. It's about surpassing them so spectacularly that they become irrelevant in the face of the greatness you've built.